Social class in India was fairly similar to social class in China. Your social status was largely determined by your birth. There was little social mobility for the vast majority of people. There was a huge gap between rich and poor, and the overriding belief system had a way of justifying the gap between rich and poor. So these are all broad similarities, but India is definitely unique, and if we're going to understand social class in India, we have to understand the concept of caste system. The word caste comes from the Portuguese word casta, which means race or purity of blood. Now, historians can't really put their finger on when the caste system developed, where exactly it came from, so I won't speculate on how it came into being, but what we are sure of is that by the beginning of the classical era, so around 500 BCE, the idea that society was forever separated into four great social classes was a major part of Indian thinking. So every single person was born into a class, and in that class you remain for the rest of your life. Indians referred to these castes as varnas, so there were four varnas. Brahmins were at the top of the caste system. The Brahmins are the priests who perform rituals that allow the world to keep on functioning, because without the Brahmins' rituals, the belief was basically that everything would stop working. Right underneath the Brahmins were the Kshatriya, and these were the warriors and rulers in society. Underneath the Kshatriya were the Vaishya, and initially the Vaishya were like the peasants in China, the commoners who cultivated land. At the bottom of the caste system were the Sudras, and these were the indigenous inhabitants of India who were there before the Aryans arrived. So these people were typically servants. They were discriminated against. They weren't allowed to participate in religious rituals that the other classes were allowed to participate in. According to Varna theory, the four social classes were formed from the body of the god Purusha. So, because the social classes came from the god, it meant that they existed forever and they could never change. Despite this belief, change did happen. Members of the Brahmin and Kshatriya groups were constantly in conflict over who was the highest ranking social class, with the Brahmins eventually winning out. Many of the peasant Vaishya became merchants, leaving the door open for the Sudras to become farmers, and at the bottom a new category, lower than the Sudras, emerged. These people were called the Untouchables, and they did the dirty work in society, things like cremating corpses and serving as executioners. But if we just had the 4 or 5 Varna, it would be too easy for a complex and diverse place like India. So, on top of the Varna classes, there were more subsets of social classes that emerged over time, and these subsets were based on occupations. So, over time, urbanization led to the development of labor specialization and specific occupations, and many occupational groups known as jati were formed, and over time these jati blended with the Varna system to create classical India's caste system. So there are literally thousands of jati, and a person's jati became their primary source of identity, but people were still always associated with one of the 4 Varnas. So there were many subsets of Brahmins, many subsets of Kshatriyas, many subsets of Vaishyas, and many subsets of Sudras and Untouchables. Each jati was ranked in a hierarchy that was known to everybody, and this ranged from the highest Brahmin down to the lowest untouchable, and everybody knew what their place was in society. People were meant to stay within their jati. Only people of the same jati were allowed to get married. Only people of the same jati were supposed to eat together. So this ties into those notions of karma and dharma and rebirth or reincarnation that we looked at in the Belief Systems podcast. So the caste system in India was supported by the notions of karma and dharma and reincarnation. Essentially, the caste that you're born in reflects how well you lived in your previous life. One's duty in life is their dharma. If you perform your duty well, you will get good karma. The better you live, the better karma you get. And central to Hindu belief is the notion of reincarnation. If you have good karma, you'll be born into a higher caste. If you have bad karma, you'll be born into a lower caste. So people believe that you deserve to be in the caste that you found yourself in. So, whether you're a Brahmin or an untouchable, you deserve to be there. On top of that, any hope of moving up in the caste system could only occur through rebirth into a higher caste. Another system that kept the caste system intact were the support systems provided by the jati. Everybody had a place in society, everybody belonged somewhere, and different jati acted as support networks for people of the same jati. So the jati as a whole would look after widows and orphans, the ill. It was like a social safety net or a measure of social security. But if you didn't obey the rules of your caste, you were at risk of being kicked out, being ostracized, which would mean the loss of social status, the loss of support, and the loss of your identity. So there were far more social classes in classical India than classical China, and the system was even more rigid with less social mobility.